Okay, so good morning, everyone. So for this morning, I will give a lecture on prevention and control of non-communicable diseases. Okay, so I hope you did good in your last exam on the second law exams. Okay. So the objective of this lecture, at the end of the session, the students should be able to discuss the basic public health strategies for the prevention and control of selected communicable diseases. Okay. They should also be able to explain the salient points of the following government health programs on communicable diseases, specifically National Tuberculosis Control Program and the National Malaria Control Program. Okay, so copies of this lecture is already uploaded in the Canvas, and I also uploaded a copy of the recent manual of operating procedures for TB and for the malaria control program. So you can also read on those in your spare time. So these are my references for this lecture. So Epidemiology of Health Administrator by Dr. Mercado, the Communicable Disease Module, Prevention and Control of Communicable Disease and Community Diagnosis, and Principles of Infectious Disease Control chapter on Principles of Infectious Disease Control by Robert Kim Farley. So let's go first on the global burden of disease. So as you can see from this picture from 1990 to 2017, you will see a decrease in the number of communicable diseases. So the red shaded area. So these are the communicable diseases. Okay, but they also include maternal, neonatal, and nutritional diseases. So as you can see, there's a decrease in the number of those having communicable diseases, while there's an increase in the number of those having non-communicable diseases, the blue area. The shaded area for injuries remains the same for the past 30 years. Okay. This is also another graph figure of the global burden of infectious diseases, as you can see here. So all types of infectious diseases, diarrhea, lower respiratory tract and infections, and other infectious diseases, malaria and neglected tropical diseases, TB, HIV, other communicable diseases, all of them are decreasing for the past 30 years. So that can be because of the uh, uh, improvement in the sanitary conditions in all countries. So that is the reason why we have a decrease in the number of communicable diseases or infectious diseases. The share of total disease burden by cause by the world in 2017, as you can see here, only respiratory diseases is part of the top 10. Okay, and this is the only one that is partly due to infection. But most of these respiratory diseases are not actually infection per se, because this includes COPD and asthma. So if you would really look into the infectious diseases or communicable diseases, it's only here, malaria and neglected tropical diseases, that infectious disease came in. Okay, so that's outside of the top 10, okay, of the total disease burden. Top 10 global cause of death by WHO in 2019. Again, as you can see, lower respiratory tract infection is number 4. And then the yearly diseases is number 8. So we only have 2 out of the top 10 global cause of death, which is due to infectious diseases. How about in the Philippines? So I showed you the global burden of communicable disease. For the Philippines, this is the top 10 cause of death or the top mortality cause of mortality in the Philippines. So in 2019 and 2020, 4 of the top 10 causes of death are due to infectious diseases. So we have pneumonia, and then COVID-19 virus for 2020. 2019, we do not have yung COVID virus yet. And then respiratory tuberculosis and chronic respiratory infections. So 4 of the top 10 in 2020 and 2019 are due to infectious diseases. But that changed in 2021. So in 2021, TB is not anymore part of the top 10. Okay, so there's only 3 out of the 10 uh, cause of mortality are due to infectious diseases. So we have pneumonia, then COVID-19, and then chronic lower respiratory diseases at number 10. How about morbidity? Okay, so this is the top leading cause of morbidity in the Philippines for 2019. So 8 out of the 10 causes of morbidity are due to infectious diseases. So we have respiratory tract infection, urinary tract infection, lower respiratory tract infection, diarrhea, pneumonia, skin disease, and bronchitis. So 8 out of the top 10 are due to, and influenza are due to infectious diseases. So the only non-communicable disease is hypertension and what? Animal bites. Okay? So those are the only two non-communicable diseases. And this is the natural history of communicable disease. Sorry for the poor picture. This came from the book of Dr. Mercado. Okay, so this, if you still remember, we asked you to create a natural history of a disease during your first lecture for the PC. So this is the interaction of the agent, host, and environment. This is the subclinical reaction, and this is yung sequela. Okay, so either the outcome of communicable disease is either death, clinical recovery with the carrier stage, or complete clinical recovery. I will not discuss this further, the ecological trial, because this has been discussed before in the lecture on epidemiology. Suffice it to say that for infectious disease to occur, there should be an imbalance in the ecological triad, in the agent, the host, and the environment. Okay? And you have to include the vector for communicable diseases. So these are the process of infection. This is the process of infection. So there's 6 requirements needed for infection to set in. 1, there should be a suitable environmental condition. Okay, example, for leptospirosis to set in. So dapat merong rain and then flood. Okay, for leptospirosis. And then there should be a suitable reservoir that should be present. I will tell you later on what are the different types of reservoir. Then a susceptible host must be present to carry the disease. There should be a satisfactory portal of entry into the host where the infection would set in, and an accessible portal of exit from the host to make it communicable. Okay? And appropriate means of dissemination and transmission to a new host. So I will also tell you the different types of transmission for communicable diseases. These are the possible four outcomes of the agent-host environment interaction if there's an imbalance or a balance of the agent host environment interaction. Okay, so first, the host will ward off the pathogen, and if the host ward off the pathogen, then no infection will set in. Okay, and you can also have balance equilibrium, wherein the host was not able to ward off the pathogen, but there's still an apparent infection. Okay, and then we have your subclinical conditions and your full-blown clinical case. Okay, and this is the chain of infection. So we will tackle this one by one. So we have pathogen, reservoir, portal of exit, mode of transmission, portal of entry, and the susceptible host. So we go first with the pathogen. Pathogen is any element, substance, or force, whether living or non-living, the presence or absence of which can initiate or perpetuate a disease process. So the pathogen has three characteristics: inherent characteristic, the characteristic directly related to man, and the characteristic related to environment. And so these are the types of pathogens that we have. So we have helminths, protozoans, bacteria, virus, fungi, rickettsia, chlamydia, and prions. Prions, this is the one that causes mad cow disease. Some definition of terms. When you say infectivity, it is the ability of the agent to infect the host. Okay, so the ability of the agent to get inside the host. Okay, and pathogenicity meanwhile, refers to the ability of the agent to create a reaction inside the host. So with that reaction, you will have now your signs and symptoms of the disease. Okay. So it can be local or general, clinical or subclinical. Virulence refers to the severity of the infection. Okay. And if we talk about virulence, we are talking about mortality. Okay. So the higher the virulence of the agent, the higher will be its mortality. While antigenicity is the ability of the agent to stimulate the host to produce antibodies. Okay. This is your antigen-antibody reaction. With those definitions, you can now surmise that an agent with high infectivity, so when you say the agent has high infectivity, it will infect a lot of people. And it has high pathogenicity, it means that those who are infected will have the signs and symptoms. But if it has low antigenicity, it means that those who were infected will not be able to develop antibodies against that particular infection. So what will happen if a lot of people got infected, a lot of people got the signs and symptoms, but they were not able to fight off the disease? Then you will have a situation wherein there is a high prevalence of the disease in the community. Okay? If the agent has high infectivity, again, it will infect a lot of people, but low pathogenicity, meaning those who are infected will not show any signs and symptoms. Okay? So if those infected will not show any signs and symptoms, then they will produce a mild or subclinical symptom and the carrier state of the disease. Okay, so that's for your pathogen. We now have your reservoir. Okay, so for the reservoir, we have three types: the human reservoir, the animal reservoir, and the environmental reservoir. So tackle that one by one. So when you say human reservoir, by the way, when you say reservoir, it is the habitat in which the infectious agent normally lives, grows, and multiplies. Okay. So when you say human reservoir, this is all about the carrier state of the person. Okay, so a carrier is a person without apparent disease who is nonetheless capable of transmitting the agent to others. So the patient has no signs and symptoms, but he can infect other people. So they have three types: the asymptomatic carrier who never shows symptoms during the time they are infected, the incubatory or convalescent carrier who are capable of transmission before or after they are clinically ill, and the chronic carrier continues to harbor the agent. Example of chronic carrier is hepatitis B. Then we have the animal reservoir. The animal reservoir is also called as the zoonotic diseases. Okay, so for the zoonotic diseases, we all know that dog, cats, and bats will cause rabies. For the rats, you have your leptospirosis and rat bite fever. For the cattle disease, we have anthrax, brucellosis, and prions disease. How about vectors? So you have your reservoir, then we have your vectors. Vectors, these are living organisms that transmit an infectious disease agent from an infected animal to a human or another animal. Okay. So examples of vectors are arthropods, mosquitoes, ticks, flies, fleas, and lice. Okay. And to differentiate that from vermins, vermins are pest or nuisance animals that spread disease or destroy crops or livestock. So this includes rats, okay, yung mga vermins. Now, for the environmental reservoir, these will include soil and water. Okay, so we have, for the soil, we have Clostridia. Okay, so that's that will cause tetanus or botulism. We have fungi, bacteria. Dust particle, we have Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and also parasites. We have your soil-transmitted helminthiasis for the soils. For the water, we have yung water-borne diseases. So ito yung mga diarrheal diseases. Tropism, on the other hand, is the agent's preference to attack and stay in a special location in the host. So for cholera prefers to stay in the digestive tract. Staphylococcus, mostly see them in the skin. Herpes zoster will be seen along the nerve system. So, and that is the reason why when you see patients with herpes zoster, you will see the vesicles lining up in a straight line, corresponding to the nerve fibers. Okay. And polio situates itself in the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. So that's your reserve one. We now have your portal of exit. So for the portal of exit, this is where the organism will come out to be able to infect other people. So we have respiratory tract as exit. So this includes all the respiratory diseases, including COVID. For the anus, we have those who belongs to the orophycal route. So we have hepatitis B, we have diarrheal diseases, we have the soil-transmitted helminthiasis. So this belongs to the orophycal route. And for the skin, we have examples of yung skin are those transmitted by direct infection. So this includes your varicella, includes your human papilloma virus or HPV. So those are transmitted via the skin. For the modes of transmission, so we have two types of modes of transmission. Okay, we have direct and indirect mode of transmission. So for direct, we have the direct contact and we have the droplet spread. Okay, and for the indirect, we have the vehicle-borne, vector-borne. Vehicle-bornes are from fomites. Vector-borne, these are your vectors that we have discussed earlier. So we have two types, mechanical and biologic vector-borne. When we say mechanical, there's no sexual reproduction within the vector. And when we say biological, something happens within the vector. Okay, so the organism, the agent develops within the vector. And for airborne, we have aerosol and dust. So examples of that for direct contact, we have, so these are the examples of direct contact. We have kissing, sexual contact, skin-to-skin contacts. We have scabies, skin infections, and sexually transmitted diseases for direct contact. Okay. For the droplet spread, we have mumps, pertussis, common cold, strep throat. So, and for the indirect contact, this is contact with contaminated surfaces, clothing. These are yung fomites natin. So we have skin infections. Example of skin infections is yung pediclosis pubis that you can get from sharing swimming suits and shorts. There. And vectors, so this will come from bites from disease-carrying ticks, fleas, and mosquitoes. So we have Lyme disease, encephalitis, dengue fever. So you have all of those. And vehicle, so this is eating or drinking contaminated food or beverage or transfusing infected blood. Okay, like for hepatitis B, fomites, and so this includes some diarrheal diseases, hepatitis B and C. Airborne, so we have chickenpox, TB, smallpox, SARS, and anthrax. Okay, for airborne. So that's the mode of transmission. We now go to the portal of entry. So how will they come into the host? So we have the respiratory tract again. If you inhale the organism, intact skin for direct contact, gastrointestinal tract for foodborne diseases. Mucous membrane will, example of mucous membrane will be HIV, okay, and gonorrhea, okay. Genitourinary tract, those coming from, you have your urinary tract infections, and also some sexually transmitted infections, and placenta. This will be the vertical transmission from mother to child. So after the portal of entry, we have yung susceptible host. Okay, so for the host factors, okay, so we have age, sex, and race, culture, and defense mechanism. For age, so you will see for younger individuals, we have more of yung measles for younger individuals as compared to the adults. Okay. And for the adults, we have more of yung non-communicable diseases. Pero we are talking of communicable diseases here. So for communicable diseases and among sa adults, we have schistosomiasis. Adults are more prone to schistosomiasis than as compared to younger children. For sex, we have vaginal infection, syempre, for females and for males. For males, TB is more common among males and HIV is more common among males. For the race, ano ba sa race? So for coronavirus, for COVID, it is more common among black, okay, as compared to whites. It's also more common among Asians in COVID virus. For culture, examples of culture, we have Muslims. For Muslims, you will not find Muslims having taeniasolium. Okay, why? Because taeniasolium is you can get that only from porks, and Muslims do not eat pork. And for Indians, you will not see Taenia saginata. Okay, ayan. Ano ba? Also, we have for as Filipinos, we have yung old practice before of yung mga of traditional birth attendants or the helots, wherein they usually cut the umbilical cord using bamboo sticks. Okay, and so yon. And for the defense mechanism, so I think I have a slide for defense mechanism yung next slide yata. And so this is yung for defense mechanism. For anatomical defense mechanism, we have yung skin. So that's for our defense. And also the skull. Okay, so yung skull natin, that's very, very hard to prevent yung magkaroon ng damage sa brain natin. Okay. Immunity, we have passive and active immunity. When we say passive immunity, included dito yung transmission, yung maternal to child transmission of immunity. Okay. Yan. And ano pa ba? Yan. For active immunity, we have yung having yung natural infection. Okay, so if you have your natural infection, then your body will develop antibodies against that particular agent. So you will develop active immunity. Okay. Inherent susceptibility is the ability of the host to resist and yung disease independent of antibodies. So that's your inherent susceptibility. Excuse me. Resistance, this is the sum of all body mechanisms. So lahat na yan, pag samasamahan nyo, yung different body mechanisms, the immunity, and the inherent susceptibility of the individual. So that's your resistance. When you say tolerance, paano ba yung tolerance? Tolerance, tolerance means the individual is presented with the infection, nakapasok na yung infection, pero the patient or the host will not develop any signs and symptoms. Okay? Wala siyang clinical manifestation, so that's tolerance. Where premonition means if the patient is already infected with the disease, even if you give more infection, hindi na siya magbabago kasi meron infected na nga siya. So that's premonition. Okay. So when we talk about communicable disease, we have to talk about incubation period. Okay, so for the incubation period, it is incubation period depends on actually hindi yan virulence dapat infectivity yan pero virulence yung nasa libro. So infectivity, dose and portal of entry, and the host defense mechanism. Okay, and the inherent character of the agent. Okay. Importance of the incubation period, some of these I will teach you when I give the lecture on disaster. So tracing the source of infection at the contact, period of surveillance, identification of point source of propagated epidemics, and finding the end of an outbreak or epidemic. I will teach all of these when I give the lecture on disaster, how to compute for all of these or how to know when your outbreak is going to end. Okay. For the immunization, an example of this one is for rabies vaccine. So you have to know the incubation period of rabies vaccine. Why? Because you can only give the rabies vaccine during the incubation period. once that particular subject or patient develops signs and symptoms of rabies, then the vaccine will not have any effect anymore. Okay? Communicable period is the time when the infectious agent will be transferred directly or indirectly from an infected person to another person. So, at yung time that that particular patient will be infectious or communicable. Okay, so yung nakakahawa na siya. Okay, so I'll give you 3 examples of communicable period depending on that particular situation. If it's before or during or after the signs and symptoms. Okay, so one example is chickenpox. Okay, so infection disease caused by varicella zoster virus. The latent period for chickenpox is shorter than the incubation period, so the child with chickenpox become infectious to others before developing symptoms. So this is how it looks like, okay, for chickenpox. Okay, so this is the incubation period for chickenpox. Okay, and this is the time that the patient will develop signs and symptoms of the disease. Okay, this is the latent period of chickenpox. Okay, and this is the infectious period of chickenpox. So the latent period is shorter than the incubation period. So the time that the patient is infectious is before the patient develops the signs and symptoms of the disease. Okay. So if that is the case, then the question now is, why is it that when the patient, especially mga children, have chickenpox, why is it that they are not allowed to go back to school? Okay? Ba, yung iba, 2 weeks, hindi pinapapasok. And some will say that as long as you have yung scabs, as long as you have the vesicles, then you are communicable. So that is not true. Okay? So if that is not true, if the patient is not anymore communicable, if once that patient develops yung vesicles, the trademark vesicles of chickenpox, then bakit di siya pinapapasok sa school? Okay? So the reason for that is not because of the communicability period. Okay, because the communicability period is before, that's 5 days before you develop the signs and symptoms. So once you develop signs and symptoms, hindi ka na nakakahawa. So kaya siya hindi pinapapasok is because we don't want that child to be bullied in school. Okay? Kasi di ba, pag pumasok yan sa school with all the vesicles there in his or her skin, then pagtatawanan niya ng mga classmates niya. Okay, tawain yan, bubuli yan ng mga classmates kasi ang pangit tingnan. Okay, so that's the reason why we don't want them to go back to school and not because they are infectious. Okay. Another example, we have yung HIV. The clinical signs and symptoms will manifest if they have yung AIDS already. So the latent period is relatively short, and infectious period occurs before the onset of symptoms. Okay. So again, this is yung HIV. So this is the latent period, and this is the infectious period. Okay. So latent period is shorter than the incubation period, but the infectious period goes beyond the incubation period. Okay. So this is for HIV. So matagal yan. So the patient will long have will be communicable long before the patient develop the signs and symptoms. Kasi diba, matagal yung incubation period ng HIV before the patient develop AIDS, matagal yan. Pero during that time, while the patient still has HIV, hindi pa siya person with AIDS, that particular person is already communicable. And long after the patient had AIDS, then communicable pa rin yung patient nyo. Okay? And for malaria, this is caused by Plasmodium. Okay, so I think you already had a seminar on malaria. So the stages of the parasite are infective to mosquitoes occur about 10 days after the development of symptoms. So latent period is around 10 days longer than the incubation period. Okay, so early treatment of symptoms could have an important effect on the transmission. Okay. Yeah. So this is for malaria. This is natural history of malaria. So you can see, yung latent period is longer than the incubation period. Okay? So, the person will be communicable once that patient develop the signs and symptoms of the disease. Okay, so this is the time that the patient will develop the signs and symptoms of the disease, then that is the time that the patient will be infectious. Yeah, so I gave you 3 examples of communicability period na iba-iba siya. Okay, so we have first, and so first we have yung ayan. Okay, sorry, sumobra. So we have yung chickenpox, wherein the communicability period is before the occurrence of the signs and symptoms. Then we have yung HIV. The communicability period is before and after the development of the signs and symptoms. And lastly, malaria. The communicability period is after the development of signs and symptoms. Okay? Now, for the levels of prevention, this has been explained also during the lecture on epidemiology. So, hindi ko na masyadong pagtutuunan ng pansin to. So, we have yung primordial, primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Okay, so for primary prevention, again, we have yung health promotion as part of primary prevention, and we have yung specific protections. Specific protection includes segregation, isolation, and quarantine, and control of means of spread by vector control or environmental sanitation, and increasing the resistance of the host. So by giving vaccines, by providing chemoprophylaxis, and by providing mechanical barrier. Example of mechanical barrier for the dengue virus, we ask yung children to wear long sleeves shirts. Okay? And for the isolation and quarantine, so you must remember that you isolate people who are infected, okay? And you quarantine those who are exposed or who are not infected. So yung na-expose ang quarantine, and then yung infected, i-isolate. Okay, so medyo nagkagulo dyan during COVID, di ba? If you remember, during COVID, ang tawag nila, if the patient already has yung COVID, may signs and symptoms, sabi ko quarantine. That is wrong. You do not quarantine people who are already infected. You isolate them because you do not want them to spread the disease. And that's the reason why you isolate them. Okay? These are the different categories of isolations. We have strict contact, respiratory, enteric drainage, blood fluid. This is just for your information. Do not memorize this. This will not come out in the exams. So this is just good to know. Okay? You will learn more of this during your clerkship. Doon yan kailangan during your clerkship. But now, you're only first-year students, wag nyo nang masyadong pag-isipan yan. Basta alam nyo lang that there are different categories of isolation. Secondary prevention, you have screening and case-finding activities. And so these are the different types of screening. We have mass screening, we have targeted or selective screening, opportunistic screening, and individual and mass case finding. So mass screening, ito yung maramihan na ginagawa na screening. So we do that with soil-transmitted helminthiasis, sometimes yung mass screening. Okay? And targeted or selective screening, ito yung pagka, ano ba, meron siyang mataas, meron siyang lagnat, meron siyang sakit, and you do CBC, you do culture and sensitivity, so that's targeted or selective screening. Okay. Opportunistic screening, so ito yung mga, like example, yung mga people who wants to have physical examination for work opportunities, and then bigla na lang you will find na meron sila infection sa ihe, so that's opportunistic infection. Opportunistic screening. And individual and mass case finding, ito yung mga what we do with TB. Okay, so TB in prison, we do mass screening of patients dun sa prison to find out sino yung mga may TB. And tertiary prevention, we have yung rehabilitation ang kasama sa tertiary prevention. Okay. So these are the different types of tertiary prevention. So kasama sa tertiary prevention, included in the tertiary prevention is placement of the subject after the infection. So work opportunities for the subjects. And if the patient died, then psychological counseling for those who remain. Okay. These are the different infection control, okay, depending on the route, okay, depending on the mode of transmission. And so for direct contact, we use yung condom, okay, for sexually transmitted infection. For droplet, we have respiratory etiquette. For indirect contact, we have hand hygiene and sanitizing infected surfaces. For vector, we have vector control. For vehicle, again, proper hygiene and sanitation and cooking your food well to prevent food contamination. Okay? And for airborne, again, respiratory etiquette. Control measures apply to the host. You have active immunization and passive immunization. Okay. So passive immunization, these are your immunoglobulin. So your rabies immunoglobulin, yung tetanus immunoglobulin. So that's passive immunization. Okay. Kasi binibigyan nyo na mismo yung immunoglobulin. Active immunization, yung all the rest of the vaccines for them to develop antibodies. Okay. So included siya yung COVID vaccine. Okay. And chemoprophylaxis for those going to Palawan. So giving of doxycycline for those going to Palawan to prevent malaria. Okay. Behavioral change. So ito yung change of lifestyle. Kasama na sa behavioral change. Reverse isolation. When you say reverse isolation, this is done for those who have autoimmune diseases. Okay, so they have lower immunity. So you isolate them not because they can spread the disease, but you isolate them because you do not want them to get a disease. Okay, so yung movie before, yung Bubble Boy, that's reverse isolation. Okay. Then protective barriers, so yung long sleeves and improving yung host resistance. These are the different types of vector control. So we have chemical. So in chemical, use of DDT, use of sprays. Environmental, included yung 4 o'clock habit. Okay, so you change yung environment. So taob nyo lahat ng mga paglalagay ng tubig to prevent yung mosquito from breeding in those water containers. And biological, so one example of biological that was tested in the Philippines before during the height of dengue is yung genetically modified mosquitoes. Ito yung mga wingless mosquitoes. So when they mate, yung kanilang offsprings would not have any wings, so they will not be able to fly. If they will not be able to fly, then they will not be able to bite individuals. And yung magiging anak nila lahat ay lalaki. Okay, so ayan, so they will all die out, so no more means of reproduction kasi if they are all males, then how can they reproduce? Okay. We did that in Muntinlupa City, so yung genetically modified mosquitoes. Unfortunately, it's a failure. Wala, hindi naman bumaba yung cases of dengue in Muntinlupa after pinalipad yung mga genetically modified mosquitoes. Okay. But studies done in other Asian countries showed that genetically modified mosquitoes are effective in decreasing the incidence of dengue. Pero in the Philippines, nag-fail siya. Applied sa environment, again, provision of safe water, again, proper disposal of feces, food and milk sanitation, and design of facilities and equipment. So in proper disposal of feces, we had that before. So there was an outbreak of cholera. So ito yung why there was an outbreak, kasi yung andun sa may upland, sa may taas ng bundok, those people would defecate dun sa river, and then yung feces nila will go down to sa river, yung nasa baba will drink from that river na nandun yung cholera from the feces. Okay, so nagkaroon ng outbreak of cholera. Some definition of terms for communicable diseases that you need to know. When you say eradication, this is permanent reduction to zero of the worldwide incidence of infection caused by a specific agent. So that's eradication. Example of a disease that was already eradicated, this is smallpox. Okay. When you say elimination, reduction to zero of the incidence of a specified disease in a defined geographical area. So hindi pa buong mundo yan. Okay, pag elimination. Okay. When you say extinction, the infectious agent no longer exists in nature or in laboratory. So yung smallpox is not extinct, it's only eradicated. Why? Because you can still see smallpox in level 4 laboratories. Okay? Yung mga level 4 laboratories, that's where you will see yung mga anthrax, yung mga highly infectious diseases na ginagamit for terrorism. Okay? Including yung smallpox. Applied to the agent, we have cleaning, cooling, pasteurization, disinfection, and sterilization. Most of these is for foodborne diseases. So these are the key elements of an effective infection control program. So you have immunization or vaccination of the employees. This is in one industry. So proper waste management, cleaning and disinfection, especially of the workplace, safe use of sharps or syringes. So making use of containers, using personal protective equipment and hand and respiratory hygiene, and training of all employees for proper infection control. Okay. And again, syempre, very important, use of standard precautions. This is yung video of a good program for infection. Sorry, hindi siya. Ayaw niyang mag-play. I'll just show this to you later. And as part na lang doon sa TB control program. Okay. An example of a case. So this is an example of case. So hookworm infection is caused by parasites which are common in Ethiopia. The parasites live in the human intestines and lay eggs which are expelled from the body with the feces into the soil. The eggs grow into worms in the soil which penetrate the skin of people walking barefooted. So identify which is the infectious agent, what is the reservoir, what is the mode of transmission, and what is the route of exit and route of entry. So I'll give that to you as a assignment na hindi naman kailangang i-submit. So just study that particular case. Baka ganyan yung ilabas ko sa exams. Okay? So in summary, I told you the global and Philippine burden of communicable diseases, the chain of infection, and the prevention of communicable diseases. So again, these are my references. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions, reserve those questions. So write it down. So write down your questions, and then I will see you again when I give the lecture on disaster control, epidemiology of disaster in the Philippines. So ask your questions then, okay, when I give the lecture on disaster. I'm sorry that I was not able to meet you face-to-face now because the lecture coincided with the Dean's Committee meeting. So I have to attend the Dean's Committee meeting, so I'm not able to see you face-to-face. And face-to-face, online man. I was not able to give a synchronous lecture for this particular topic. Okay. But again, reserve your questions, write down, and then ask me the questions when I give you the lecture on disaster. Okay. So that's the end of the lecture. Again, thank you very much.